They say pride comes before a fall, but no one warns you how far the fall can go when you've spent your whole life climbing. One moment, I was on horseback, riding beneath a sun that blazed like gold over the plains. The next, I was tumbling down a rocky incline, ribs cracking against the earth, my leg twisted beneath me at a grotesque angle. Pain has a funny way of humbling a man, especially a man like me. The locals called me Jake Carter. Just another drifter who'd taken a liking to the slow life in Silveridge, a dusty little town with more horses than cell towers. Nobody knew the truth, and I preferred it that way. Because the truth was, I wasn't some ranch hand looking to disappear. I was Jacob R. Caldwell, founder and former CEO of Caldwell MedTech, a global healthcare company that had revolutionized trauma equipment and diagnostics. I'd made my first $100 million by the time I was 32. By 40, I'd built a network of hospitals and labs stretching across 4 continents. And by 45, I was exhausted, drained, disillusioned, and dangerously close to forgetting why I'd started it all. So I walked away, left the boardrooms, the headlines, the luxurious penthouses. I wanted something real. I wanted people who didn't look at me like a bank vault or a stepping stone. I came to Silveridge with a hat on my head and dust on my boots, intent on staying anonymous. But lying in that ditch, leg broken, chest tightening with each breath, I wondered if I'd made a foolish choice. I couldn't move. My phone was smashed. My vision blurred. The only thing I could see clearly was the sky, wide, empty, and uncaring. God, I whispered, if there's still a reason for me to be here, send someone. And then, I heard the sound of hurried footsteps. A figure appeared at the edge of the trail, silhouetted by the setting sun. She looked like an angel stepping through the light, but spoke with the urgency of someone who knew time was critical. "Oh God, don't move," she said, rushing to my side. "I'm a nurse. Can you hear me?" I nodded weakly, pain turning every movement into agony. She dropped to her knees and unzipped a canvas medical bag slung over her shoulder. Her hands moved fast but gently, checking my pulse, examining the angle of my leg, stabilizing it with a branch and a scarf she ripped off her neck. She was calm, efficient, brilliant. "You took a nasty fall," she murmured, eyes scanning me for other injuries. "But you're going to be okay. Help is coming." Her voice had a steadiness I hadn't heard in years, not even in the polished tones of corporate first responders. It wasn't rehearsed. It was real. I wanted to ask her name. I wanted to tell her who I was. But all I could do was look into her eyes and try not to black out. "I've got you," she whispered. It was the first time in years I'd believed those words. When the medics arrived and loaded me into the ambulance, she climbed in with them. I tried to protest, but she silenced me with a soft smile. "You're not getting rid of me that easy, cowboy." I woke up hours later in a small hospital room. Clean, modest, and unfamiliar. But somehow, it felt safe. I'd spent years helping build hospital systems around the world. This one, I recognized. The layout, the equipment, the med scanners. I'd paid for most of them. Silveridge General Hospital. I'd funded the entire expansion a few years back through one of my anonymous foundations. I had never set foot in the place until now. And the woman from the trail? She was at my bedside, checking my vitals. "Good," she said, scribbling on a clipboard. "Your fever's down. We managed to reduce the swelling in your leg, and your ribs should heal with time." I tried to sit up and winced. She pushed me gently back down. "Easy there, cowboy." That voice, that calm presence. She wasn't just another nurse. She was the nurse. The kind that reminded you why healing mattered in the first place. "My name's Lily. Lily Harper," she said. "And you are." I hesitated. I could have told her the truth. But something stopped me. "Jake," I said finally. "Jake Carter." She raised an eyebrow. "Well, Jake, try not to go flying off cliffs next time. We're a small town. We don't do frequent flyer miles for helicopters." I laughed, then groaned at the pain. She smiled, and I caught a glimpse of something pure. Something I'd been missing for years. Over the next few days, I remained under Lily's care. She checked on me every few hours, always with the same calm energy. She had this way of making you feel human, even when you were broken. And every time she left the room, I couldn't help but watch her go, wondering what kind of person chooses to stay in a town like this, giving their whole heart to people who may never even say thank you. Most people in my world would have called her small town ordinary, but I knew better. She was exceptional. And she had no idea I was the man who had built half the tools she was using, or that the very bed I lay in had my fingerprints on its funding. I began to ask myself, what if I'd spent my life chasing the wrong things? What if the real legacy wasn't in profit margins or patents, but in people like Lily? It was a thought that scared me, because it meant starting over. And I had no idea if I was strong enough to do that again. But fate has a way of teaching you who you really are, especially when you're too broken to pretend anymore. I didn't know it then, but those quiet mornings in the hospital would become the most important days of my life. Every sunrise, Lily would appear, coffee in one hand, clipboard in the other. She never treated me like a burden, never talked down to me. She spoke with the ease of someone who didn't need to impress anyone. And that was rare in my world. Even though I was confined to a bed with fractured ribs and a leg in traction, I started looking forward to each interaction with her. Not because I was lonely, but because she made me feel seen, like I mattered beyond what I could produce or donate or achieve. "You've got grit," she said one morning, fluffing my pillow. "Most people whine after paper cut. You're taking 3 broken bones like a champ." "Maybe I'm just used to pain," I muttered. She paused. That kind of pause that meant she wasn't going to let that comment go. "You shouldn't be," she said quietly. "Pain might make us stronger, but it's not meant to be a home." That hit me harder than anything I'd felt physically. Because that's exactly what I'd done. Built a mansion inside pain and called it ambition. As the days passed, I learned more about her than I ever expected. Lily wasn't from Silveridge originally. She'd come from a city where nurses were underpaid, overworked, and disrespected. She left after watching her mother, also a nurse, collapse from exhaustion during a double shift. "I promised myself I'd never work for a system that burned out the people trying to save others," she told me once, adjusting my four. "So you came here?" She smiled, her eyes drifting to the window. "Silveridge may be small, but it's honest. People here still look you in the eye. And when you save a life, they remember your name." That stuck with me. I'd spent so long building hospitals that I forgot what healing actually looked like. It wasn't in the marble lobbies or executive wings. It was in these small moments, bandages, quiet talks, human touch. One afternoon, she brought me outside in a wheelchair to feel the sun again. It was the first time I'd breathed fresh air in nearly 2 weeks. We sat under an old oak tree near the garden, and she pulled out a small notebook. "What's that?" I asked. "My dream journal," she said, almost shyly. "I write down the future I want to build. Doesn't mean it'll happen, but it helps keep me going." I couldn't hide my curiosity. "What kind of future?" She hesitated, then opened it and handed it to me. Inside were drawings of a new clinic, a children's wellness center, and scribbled ideas for community outreach programs. She even had sketches of mobile health units that could reach remote farms. "I want to make care accessible, not just for emergencies, but for real, long-term wellness." I stared at the pages in awe. These weren't just dreams. They were plans. Smart, scalable, practical ideas that could reshape small-town medicine. And yet, she'd never spoken about it like it was worth anyone else's attention. "Why haven't you shown this to anyone?" I asked. She shrugged. Who'd listen to a nurse from nowhere with no capital and a stack of pipe dreams? I wanted to tell her I'd invested in billion-dollar startups with far less clarity than what I saw in that notebook. But I couldn't, not yet. Something in me still clung to the quiet. So instead, I just said, "You'd be surprised who's listening." My body slowly began to heal. The swelling subsided. I graduated from a wheelchair to crutches. The pain lessened, but what never faded was my desire to see Lily succeed. She didn't just care about health. She lived it, breathed it, fought for it. and I realized I hadn't felt that kind of fire in years. One evening, I stood in front of the mirror in my hospital room, bracing on crutches, staring at my reflection. I looked older, thinner, less invincible. But maybe that was a good thing. Because invincibility had isolated me. Vulnerability was bringing me back to life. I'd spent my career trying to save healthcare from the top down. But Lily, she was doing it from the ground up. And maybe, just maybe, that was the only way it would ever truly work. A few nights later, I overheard an argument outside my room. The hospital administrator was talking to Lily, and their voices were low but tense. "I'm sorry, Nurse Harper," he said, "but the board denied your grant request. Again. We can't approve funding for an outreach van right now, not with the new wing barely completed. But we're seeing twice the number of farm injuries this season," she pleaded. "If we had even one mobile unit, we could prevent half of them." "I understand, but it's not feasible." I could hear the frustration in her voice, and something inside me snapped. I waited until he left and then called her in. She entered, trying to hide her disappointment. But I'd seen enough in boardrooms to recognize the look of someone who'd just had their heart stepped on. "Let me ask you something," I said. "If money wasn't an issue, what would you do first?" She blinked, caught off guard. "What? Say you had the funding. The full amount. What's your first move?" "I'd get the mobile unit running," she said without hesitation. "Hire 2 field nurses, train volunteers, start rural checkups next week." Her response was immediate, thought out, passionate. I nodded. That's what I thought. She laughed nervously. "You talk like you're some kind of investor." I looked at her and, for the first time, saw what I'd been missing all along. "I used to be," I said softly. "Maybe I still am." That night, I pulled out my phone and called someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year, Marta Vasquez, my most trusted legal aid from Caldwell Foundation. "Hey, boss," she said, shocked to hear my voice. "You still alive?" "Barely," I chuckled. "But I've got a mission. I want you to start a new fund. Quietly. Name it after the Silveridge tree. Allocate $2.5 million to rural healthcare development, and make sure the first grant goes to a nurse named Lily Harper." Marta was silent for a moment. "Jake, are you coming back?" I looked out the hospital window where the stars now shimmered over the town. Maybe not in the way I left. But yeah, I'm coming back. This time, for something real. A few weeks later, I was discharged from the hospital. By then, I could walk with a cane, though every step reminded me I wasn't the invincible man I once thought I was. I moved into a modest guest house on the outskirts of town, far from the executive suites I was used to. No one knew who I was. Just a limping cowboy with a slow gait and a guarded past. Except Lily. She knew my pain, my schedule, and my habits. But not my name. Not really. To her, I was Jack, the quiet patient who'd broken ribs and carried secrets. Not Jake Caldwell, the CEO behind Caldwell Health Group, the name on the plaque at the hospital's front door. And for the first time in years, I wanted to keep it that way. I spent my mornings volunteering at the animal shelter and my afternoons walking the hills, watching the town from a distance. Silveridge was simple, humble, yet it pulsed with a kind of raw beauty I'd missed in skyscrapers and gala events. Lily, meanwhile, was a storm of motion. She'd submitted a revised proposal for the mobile health unit, this time to an anonymous new fund that had recently taken interest in rural health projects. She didn't know I'd created it. Didn't know I'd already approved her grant. A month later, the first van rolled into town, painted in cheerful greens and blues, with Silveridge Roots Wellness Project stenciled across the side. It felt like a piece of the future parked in the middle of nowhere. The entire town buzzed with energy. Volunteers stepped forward. Farmers signed up for free screenings. Mothers brought in kids who'd never been to a clinic. It wasn't just about medicine, it was about connection. And Lily was at the heart of it all. I remember watching from a bench near the town square as she knelt next to a little boy with a bruised knee, gently wrapping it while explaining every step to his wide-eyed mother. There was no rush in her. No pride. Just presence. It was then that I realized something deeper had shifted in me. It wasn't just admiration anymore. I was falling for her. Not because she saved me, but because she reminded me of the man I used to be, before wealth hardened me and power numbed me.
She saw people.
She fought for them. And I wanted to fight for her. One evening, after the clinic had wrapped up for the day, I offered to walk her home. We strolled past the sleepy town bakery, the smell of cinnamon in the air. The moonlight painted everything silver. "You've changed," she said suddenly. I looked at her, startled. "What do you mean?" "When you first came into the hospital, you were distant. Broken, but not just physically. Now there's light in your eyes."
Peace.
I swallowed hard. "You're the reason." She laughed softly. "Don't say that." "I mean it," I said. "You reminded me of something I forgot. That healing doesn't start with medicine. It starts with someone caring enough to show up." We stopped near her porch. She turned to me, her expression softer than I'd ever seen. "I don't know who you really are, Jack," she said, searching my face. "But there's something about you that feels unfinished. Like a story I haven't heard the end of." My heart beat like a drum in my chest. "Maybe someday I'll tell you," I whispered. The very next morning, everything changed. Lily walked into the community center, holding a letter in her trembling hands. It was from the fund. From me. An official grant notice. Fully approved. With a handwritten note attached. "Thank you for reminding us that healing begins where people are. This is only the beginning. Keep going." There was no signature. But she turned to me with tears in her eyes and said, "Jack, did you have anything to do with this?" I hesitated, then smiled. "Let's just say I know people who believe in you." She shook her head, smiling in disbelief. "This kind of faith doesn't just show up. Someone out there sees what I'm trying to build." I met her gaze. "I see it." Later that week, I made a decision. No more hiding. I invited her to the old ranch I was renting. The porch looked over Silver Ridge's rolling hills. We sat with coffee in hand, the wind whispering through dry grass. "There's something I need to tell you," I began. She looked at me, quiet and calm. "My name isn't Jack. It's Jake Caldwell." Her eyes didn't blink. But I saw the flicker, the recognition. "Caldwell, as in Caldwell Health?" I nodded. "I'm the founder. The guy on all the brochures. But I walked away a year ago. The board thinks I'm on sabbatical, but truth is I crashed. I lost my way." She set her cup down, taking in my words. "You could have told me. I didn't want you to see the title. I wanted you to see the person. The man behind the name. And you thought I wouldn't?" I smiled sadly. I wasn't sure anyone would. For a long time, she didn't say anything. Then finally, she looked at me, tears rimmed in her eyes. "You're not the man I thought you were." That hurt more than I expected. "But," she added, "you're so much more." A weight lifted off my chest. "You didn't just give me a chance, Jake. You gave this whole town a lifeline. But the way you did it, quietly, humbly, that's the man I respect." I took her hand gently. "I want to build something real this time. Not just hospitals or brands. I want to build something that lasts, with people like you." She squeezed my hand back. "Then let's do it. Together." That night, under a sky full of stars, we sat side by side, two people who had spent their lives serving others, finally finding a moment to be still. And in that stillness, I realized something. Success isn't about what you build with your hands. It's about what you mend with your heart. We thought the hard part was over. The grant was in. The mobile clinic was running. Lily and I had finally torn down the wall between us. But I should have known better. Real change never comes without resistance. It began with whispers. At first, just murmurs at the local diner. "Where did all this money come from? That Jack fellow walks like a ranch hand but talks like a senator. Did Lily really land a millionaire?" Silver Ridge was a small town, and small towns are slower to trust than they are to forgive. And the moment I peeled back my alias, people started connecting the dots. The cowboy was the millionaire. The millionaire had funded the clinic. And the nurse? She was the woman he'd hidden behind. The story got twisted, just like they always do, when people feel left out of the truth. One morning, Lily walked into the clinic, her smile gone. "They're saying I manipulated you," she said softly, her voice trembling. "That I lured you here, that I used you." I stared at her in disbelief.
What?
"That's ridiculous." "I know. But Jake, we didn't exactly tell the town the full story. You showed up, gave me hope, and now we're holding a golden ticket while other programs are still begging for bandages." I stood up, anger rising in my chest. "You earned every cent of that grant. You built it before I even stepped foot here." She shook her head. "People don't care about the work. They care about the story." And in that moment, I realized the resistance wasn't against us, it was against change. A week later, the town council called a meeting. It was supposed to be routine, updates on local projects, but the moment Lily stepped up to speak, the questions began. How can we trust a project funded in secret? Why didn't you tell us where the money came from? Isn't it a conflict of interest to date your benefactor? Lily's face stayed composed, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. She answered every question with clarity, calm, and grace. She explained the grant, the paperwork, the hours she'd spent building the program long before I arrived. And then, when they asked again if she had any regrets, she paused. "No," she said firmly. "I don't regret fighting for this clinic. I don't regret helping Jake, when he needed someone. And I definitely don't regret believing in something bigger than politics or perception." The room fell silent. Then, slowly, a few people clapped. Not many, but enough. After the meeting, we sat in my truck, staring at the horizon. "I didn't come here to cause waves," I said, gripping the steering wheel. "But waves are exactly what this place needs," Lily replied. "They've been treading water for years. Now someone showed up and splashed the surface." She looked at me, her expression unwavering. "So, what do we do now?" I asked. "We stop hiding," she said. "And we fight, openly, honestly, for what we know this town can be." I smiled. "Then we fight." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. We hosted town hall forums, opened the clinic's budget to public review, invited critics to tour every inch of the mobile unit. Transparency became our armor. And slowly, hearts began to shift. A farmer who once doubted us brought in his wife for a cancer screening. The town librarian asked us to host weekly health literacy workshops. Even the mayor, initially cold, offered to partner on a countywide wellness fair. But as the town warmed up, something else threatened our mission. The corporate board of Caldwell Health had finally found me. They weren't thrilled about my vacation. I got the call one Thursday morning. "Jake," said Martin Loring, my interim CEO, "we've been patient, but this detour of yours, it's costing us." "Costing you what?" I asked. "Investor confidence. Media credibility. You're not some wild rancher. You're the face of a billion-dollar healthcare company. What are you doing out there?" "Serving people. Actually healing people," I replied. There was a long pause. "You're jeopardizing your position. You've got 60 days to return. Otherwise, we'll move forward without you." He hung up. That night, I didn't sleep. 60 days. 60 days before they voted me out of the company I built from scratch. I paced the porch, looking out at the quiet town that had reminded me of who I was. What was I supposed to do? Return to boardrooms and metrics? Or stay here, risking everything? When Lily joined me, I told her everything. She didn't flinch. "Then it's time to choose," she said. "Not between us and them, but between the man you were and the man you are now." Her words echoed in my mind. The next morning, I made a decision that terrified me. I flew back to the city, for the first time in nearly 6 months, and requested a formal board meeting. When I entered the marble-floored headquarters of Caldwell Health, my reflection stared back at me in every polished surface. The suit felt tight, the building colder than I remembered. The boardroom was filled with executives, shareholders, lawyers. Martin Loring sat at the head. "You have the floor," he said. I stood up and looked around at the faces that once cheered for me. "I built this company to bring healthcare to the people who need it most," I said. "But somewhere along the way, we traded compassion for convenience. Strategy for spreadsheets. Medicine for metrics. Murmurs filled the room. Well, I've spent the last half year in a town most of you couldn't find on a map. I saw what medicine could be. Honest, local, life-changing. I found people worth fighting for. And I found myself. I placed a folder on the table. This is a proposal to expand our rural initiative using Silveridge as the pilot model. Full transparency. Local leadership. Sustainable support. Martin sneered. And if we refuse? I looked him squarely in the eyes. Then you'll do it without me. The room fell silent. The vote didn't go my way. 7-5. Effective immediately, I was no longer CEO. I walked out of the building, heart pounding. My name would still be on the hospitals, but my hands were off the wheel. Oddly enough, I felt free. When I returned to Silveridge, Lily met me at the clinic door. She could tell by my face. "You chose us," she said softly. I nodded. "I lost everything I once thought mattered," I whispered. "But it feels like I've finally won." She hugged me tightly.
No, Jake.
Now we begin. Losing the title of CEO felt like free-falling off a mountain I'd spent years climbing. But the strangest thing was, I wasn't afraid. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't clinging to power. I was holding on to purpose. Back in Silveridge, I poured every waking hour into our little clinic. We'd started out as a mobile health unit. Now we were laying the foundation, literally, for something permanent, a full-service, community-run health center right in the heart of town. Lily and I worked side by side, often from dawn to dusk. We chased grants, partnered with universities, wrote detailed health education programs, and trained locals to become part-time aides and technicians. There were still moments of doubt. Days when the supplies ran low, or we lost a patient we'd tried so hard to save. But more than anything, there was momentum. The town started changing in ways no one expected. Families that used to drive 2 hours for checkups now walked into our center. Children learned about nutrition and hygiene through the programs we taught in schools. Mental health support became a regular part of community life, no longer whispered about in shame, but spoken of like any other form of healing. Even the most skeptical folks from the council eventually dropped by for advice, vaccines, or just to say thank you. And me? The Cowboy Millionaire became less of a myth and more of a neighbor. I was no longer hiding who I was, but I also wasn't using it as leverage. Money never moved people the way kindness did. One morning, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived from a National Health Innovation Group. We had been nominated for a Rural Medicine Award. At first, I thought it was a mistake. But it wasn't. Lily had quietly submitted our story. She never told me. Said she just wanted people to know what's possible. I stood in our dusty little office, staring at the gold-embossed invitation. The ceremony was to be held in Washington, D.C. Industry leaders, doctors, policymakers, all the people who had once sat in judgment over my boardroom decisions, would be there. They were now recognizing a clinic born in a trailer, held together by grit, prayer, and a woman who believed healing didn't require luxury. We went together. I traded in my jeans for a suit again, but I wore it like armor now, not identity. The ceremony was elegant.
Polished.
A far cry from our wooden benches and chipped paint walls. But when Lily took the stage and accepted the award, every person in that room stood up. Not for the equipment or the innovation. For the heart.
She didn't talk about me.
She talked about the patients, the kids we helped, the lonely veterans we sat with. The families who now had someone to call at 2 a.m. And when she said, "I didn't do this alone. No nurse ever really does," her eyes found mine in the crowd, and I knew. This wasn't my legacy. This was ours. That trip did more than honor our work. It opened a door. One of the attendees was a philanthropic leader from a nationwide network of rural care initiatives. After hearing our story, they offered to replicate our model in other underserved towns, with our guidance. Suddenly, our story became more than a small-town miracle. It became a blueprint. Within 3 months, Lily and I were fielding calls from Arkansas, Idaho, West Virginia. Places that sounded forgotten, just like Silveridge had once felt. We didn't want to franchise our success. We wanted to share it. So we began building a new organization, Root Care, an alliance for restoring dignity to rural healthcare. The transition wasn't easy. We trained local leaders in each town, sent them equipment, not executives, support, not strategy decks. We showed them that medicine wasn't about branding, it was about trust. Within a year, 5 towns had Root Care clinics up and running. By the second year, that number tripled. All of them were built using a community-first philosophy. Each center employed local nurses, health aides, and coordinators, people who lived there, loved there, and knew exactly how to serve their neighbors. We didn't call ourselves founders. We called ourselves neighbors in arms. And Lily was a force. She gave speeches, led workshops, trained nursing students with the same warmth she gave me the night I showed up on her doorstep as a broken man in boots. One day, after a long community outreach event, we sat beneath the stars on our clinic's back porch. The world had changed. And yet, in this quiet town with its crickets and distant train whistles, it felt like everything important had stayed the same. "I don't think I ever thanked you properly," I said to her. "For what?" "For not treating me like a millionaire. Or a patient. For seeing a man who needed purpose." She smiled. "I saw a man who wanted to serve." I took her hand. "And now I want to serve forever. With you." There were no grand speeches. No staged proposals. Just a whispered yes, and the understanding that we were building something far more valuable than money ever could. A life rooted in purpose. But even success has its storms. And ours was coming. One of the first clinics we'd helped replicate, in a struggling coal town, reported a medical error that led to a patient's death. The media latched on fast. Suddenly, Root Care wasn't the shining light. It was under fire. The narrative flipped. Unregulated, rural clinics, unqualified staff, playing doctor in places too poor to protest. I was called arrogant, irresponsible. Headlines screamed, "Former CEO's vanity project collapses under scrutiny." The same reporters who once praised me now tore me down. The pressure was unbearable. Lily, ever calm, sat with me late one night as I buried my face in my hands. "We've saved hundreds of lives," I said. "But now this. One mistake, and they forget everything." She knelt beside me. "Then remind them, not with press releases, with people." And so, we did. We didn't hire a PR firm. We invited every town leader, nurse, patient, and volunteer to tell their stories online, on camera, in letters, in town hall meetings. And they did. Mothers, veterans,
Teachers. Teens.
they spoke about the dignity our clinics gave them, about the way Root Care had filled the gaps left by politics and profit. And slowly, the tide turned again. Not because we defended ourselves, but because our impact defended us. The storm passed, and what remained was trust. Hard-earned, battle-tested, and unshakable. The years that followed were nothing short of transformative. Root Care blossomed beyond anything I dared dream when I was lying broken and unknown on Lily's couch. What had begun as a personal healing journey evolved into a movement, a revolution of care, compassion, and community. But even more than the clinics, the stories people shared, the ones that were never written in press releases or corporate memos, were what truly mattered. One summer evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills of Silver Ridge, I walked the hallways of our original clinic, now buzzing with life. Nurses greeted me by name, patients smiled without hesitation, and children laughed in the waiting room. I stopped in front of a photo wall, where faces of patients, volunteers, and staff told a silent story of resilience. There, among the photos, was a small, weathered picture of a young man in cowboy boots, me years ago before the suits, before the millions. A reminder that behind every success, there's a human story filled with struggle, hope, and love. Lily appeared beside me, her smile radiant in the soft glow of the clinic lights. "Do you ever miss it?" I asked her quietly. "Miss what?" she replied, raising an eyebrow. "The boardrooms, the power plays, the deals." She shook her head. "I never understood that world. Here, you make a real difference. People's lives change because of what you do, not what you own. Her words settled deep inside me, reaffirming what I had known all along, that true wealth isn't measured by bank accounts or titles, but by the lives we touch. That night, under a blanket of stars, I found myself reflecting on the winding path that had brought me here. From the reckless days chasing profits without purpose, to the humble moments spent beside Lily nursing me back to health, each step shaped the man I had become. I had been a cowboy chasing windmills, a billionaire in boots, lost in his own empire. But through vulnerability and healing, I rediscovered my true strength. The legacy we built together was more than clinics or awards. It was a testament to the power of empathy and the courage to change. Silveridge wasn't just a town on a map anymore. It was a beacon of hope for countless communities. As root care expanded, we made a promise. Every clinic would honor the values that started it all: accessibility, dignity, and respect for every patient, regardless of their background. We trained thousands of healthcare workers, many of whom were once patients themselves, paying forward the kindness they had received. But the most profound change was personal. Lily and I grew not only as partners in work, but in life. We built a family grounded in love, service, and a shared mission to uplift others. Our children heard stories not of wealth or fame, but of perseverance, compassion, and the responsibility that comes with privilege. One day, our youngest asked me, "Daddy, why did you give away so much?" I smiled and said, "Because the richest thing you can be is someone who cares." That answer felt true, not just for me, but for anyone willing to open their hearts and hands. Looking back, I realized the greatest fortune was never the millions in my account. It was the chance to be a healer, a neighbor, a friend, to be part of a story bigger than myself. If there's one lesson I want you to take from my journey, it's this. Success isn't about what you acquire. It's about what you give. When you lift others, you rise higher than any summit could reach. When you lead with your heart, doors open not just for you, but for everyone willing to follow. So to everyone watching, I say this. No matter where you start, no matter the odds stacked against you, your purpose can light the way. And sometimes, the person who needs saving most is yourself. Thank you for listening to my story. May you find your own path to healing and leave a legacy that shines far beyond your years.